you. Thank you. I'm actually very happy to be here. I was a yoga teacher before I was a doctor, so I feel very at home here. 1983, it was the way I got through medical school, was doing yoga in the back of the classroom. Everybody thought I was a little weird back then, but nobody was really into yoga back then. But it really helped me focus and center, and it really has sort of governed my perspective on medicine, which is really about the science of healing. But what I realized as I went through medical school was that medicine wasn't really about the science of healing. It was about the science of treating disease, which is a very different endeavor. And actually, I studied Buddhism in college. I was a huge fan of Jack Kerouac and read all his books and got very inspired and studied Buddhism. And began to sort of inquire about what is healing and how do we begin to reframe the way we think about why we get sick and how we get better. And through that process, I went through my own self-discovery and healing and really began to inquire about, what is happiness? Like, how do we create guaranteed happiness? Wouldn't that be nice if I could give you a prescription for guaranteed happiness, right? But there is one, actually. I think there is one. And I've come to realize that a lot of our malaise, a lot of our disease, a lot of our illness and suffering is really about disconnection from ourselves, from our communities, from our families, our friends. And that's why things like Facebook are so popular, because they're a way of connecting. Even though they're sort of two-dimensional, it's something. And it really has come to sort of my awareness that most of our chronic disease that we're facing, and affects 1 out of every 2 Americans. So I'm sure many of you in this room have something, or someone has something that's creating suffering, that these are really not individual problems, that these are really social diseases. And they need a social cure. And that the power of each other is what's going to fix this. It's not going to come from the healthcare system or policymakers. I mean, Tim Ryan's coming later today. He's going to speak tomorrow, and he's a friend, and he's a policymaker who's very forward-thinking, but he's in a very backward-thinking institution, which is our government. And I began to sort of chew on this, and I had an opportunity to sort of do some things I'll tell you about, which is using the power of community to help heal our chronic disease. And the biggest single thing we're facing is obesity and diabetes. That and mood disorders, depression, and so forth, and they're very connected. So as I began to sort of think about, my own life and the things that made me happy were times when I, was of service. I went, after a very traumatic fall, my sister died of cancer. I took my daughter and we went to Bhutan, which is a Buddhist country, and they have gross national happiness there. They measure metrics to define happiness. Instead of gross national product, which is a measure of the economy, measure actual happiness by all sorts of different measurements. And it was an extraordinary place, and we trekked up in the mountains, and I got a chance to heal and be with my daughter, and afterwards, we went to a Tibetan monastery in northern India, where the Dalai Lama's meditation teacher, set up a Bon Tibetan monastery and has an orphanage, and I went there to work with the children, because usually when I'm feeling bad, the best thing I can do is go help somebody else, right? And this is the abbot of Menri, the 33rd abbot of Menri Monastery in Tibet, came off over in 1959 and established this incredible monastery where he's not only has an orphanage but has built a whole monastery, monks trained and so forth. It was quite an amazing experience being there, and I began to sort of realize that illness starts with an I, right? But wellness starts with we, and that's where we need to sort of begin to come together. And these were these little monks, there was little baby mini monks they had. They're so cute. And these were orphans, and he took them in, and it was a service. And I was there in the clinic helping these kids, and they were so cute. I want to take that kid home with me. He was so cute. He was like 4 years old, and every day they'd come in, they just want to visit. They really had nothing wrong with them, and they'd want me to check him out, and then they'd go home. And it was really an extraordinary experience for me, because it really sort of reconnected me with the notion of how we need to connect to the act of service as a way of helping each other solve our problems. And one of the things I did was I found the monks had a lot of back pain, and I'm teaching them to do yoga. Actually, it was a weird situation with, a Western guy teaching Tibetan monks how to do yoga in India. I was like, okay. And I found out I was laughing my head off, because I realized that the monks don't wear any underwear underneath their robes. And it was, it was just quite a funny, comical situation, because I brought a few of them up to demonstrate, and they were trying to organize their robes so they wouldn't get into an embarrassing situation. So let's talk a little bit now about, with that context, how do we think about the future of health? And it's very different than the future of disease. It really involves us thinking globally, but also thinking about how we do this together. And there's some really key questions that, how do we create a healthy us? How do we create a healthy planet? How do we change the dynamic of what's happening in our world, where we're increasing our burden of disease, both on ourselves as human species and on the environment? And then the question is, how do we change biology? So if we're really going to create health, then it really comes down to understanding how to work with biology to create health. And that's what I do. It's called functional medicine. It's a science of actually using our understanding of biological networks to create health. And if I know how to do that, I can help people, but they have to actually do it. How do you, change biology? That's well known, and that's not something that's happening in medicine right now, but in the sphere of functional medicine and systems thinking, it's what we do. But changing behavior is a much harder thing. And I'll talk more about it as we go on in the talk, but it's a really essential question. How do we change? How do humans change? And we change together. I realize that getting healthy is a team sport. That if we're all in our little silos trying to figure our own little world, it's going to be very challenging to do that. So we have to understand that we use the power of biological networks to change biology through functional medicine and systems thinking. And we use the power of social networks to help change behavior in a positive way. And there are two things that really are essential to some of the suffering that's going on now, which is problems with our brain and problems with our belly. Our brains are not functioning and our bellies are growing. And this is leading to mood disorders, depression, dementia, ADD, as well as all the obesity-related illnesses. And they're very connected. In fact, there's the same cause for many of these problems. So, remember the Star Trek guy, the alien with the big brain? We all want to have a better brain. Who doesn't want to have a better brain? And we probably all would like a nicer belly. Now, most of you who come to Wanderlust do have good bellies already because of all the, core work that you do. But I was in Sean Korn's class over lunch, and man, she was doing some things that was getting my core. We want to sort of reverse this obesity epidemic. And it's a huge problem. $47 trillion are going to be spent over the next 20 years paying for chronic disease. It's mostly lifestyle-related preventable disease. That's the amount of money that's the GDP of the 6 largest economies combined. $47 trillion, that's a lot of money. I don't even understand what a trillion is, really. And it really is a math problem. John has 32 candy bars. He eats 28. What does he have? He has diabetes. Right? So I call this diabesity, which is the spectrum of imbalances in your blood sugar and insulin, all the way from a little bit of belly fat all the way to full-blown type 2 diabetes through prediabetes. This problem today affects 1 out of every 2 Americans. It's the single biggest health problem we have. 70 to 90 million Americans have a fatty liver caused by this. And it affects so many people. 1 out of 2 Americans have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. 90% are not diagnosed. 1 in 10 Americans have diabetes. 1 in 5 African Americans have diabetes. 1 in 3 children born today will have type 2 diabetes in their lifetime. It's a huge problem. So, and it's not just here. Globally, we have this. 80% of the world's diabetics are in the developing world. So China, I just came back from China. They now have they're the number 1 country with diabetes in the world. India's number 2. And it's a global issue because we're exporting our processed fast food diet all over the place. So how do you know if you have diabetes? Well, in my book, I have a questionnaire And on my website, I have a quiz which you can take, which tells you if you have diabetes. But it's essentially asking yourself a few simple questions. Do you have sugar and carb cravings? Do you have extra belly fat? Do you have a family history of obesity, diabetes, early heart disease? Do you have any high blood pressure or heart disease yourself? What's your blood sugar? Is it over 100? How about your triglycerides? Are they over 150? Or good cholesterol? Is it under 50? Very simple questions that you can identify this pretty quickly. So many of us have this problem, and the NIH is spending $800 million a year researching the cause of obesity. Now, I wish they'd just give that money to me, because I'd tell them what's causing it. It's what we're eating, right? It's the 29 pounds of French fries, the 23 pounds of pizza, 24 pounds of ice cream, 53, I think it's up to 57 gallons of soda. That's more than a gallon of soda per American per week. Artificial sweeteners, 24 pounds, which cause obesity, cravings, and other problems. Salt, 2.7 pounds, 90,000 milligrams of caffeine. And I just gave up coffee last week after many times of giving it up. I gave it up again. I actually feel much better. And 2,700 calories of, I'd be talking much faster if I was drinking coffee. So this lecture might go a little longer. And it's a huge budget issue. In terms of our costs, I was talking to Tim Ryan, I mean, we are spending most of their federal dollars on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and by 2042, it'll be 100% Medicare and Medicaid. We can't afford this health crisis that we're having. And 1 in 3 Medicare dollars today is spent on diabetes. Now, I found this article in the Wall Street Journal fascinating, because the authors said, you know, there's this new trend where we're seeing a decrease in life expectancy, and that women, particularly in the South, are having a decrease in life expectancy. And the big conundrum is, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Trying to figure out why is a hot topic, says a Harvard scientist. Well, let me tell you why. This is the map of America. This is the red states. These are obesity states. The more red they are, the more obesity there is. This is where the problem is. I just came back from South Carolina. I'll tell you about it in a little bit, where we actually found tremendous amounts of obesity and diabetes. I'm working with a hospital down there has 45% of the population is not overweight, but obese. And there's twice as many diabetics as the rest of the country. That's why we're seeing a decrease in life expectancy. And it's happening to our kids. We have now 40% of our kids are overweight. And what's more scary is that in the last 10 years, we've gone from 1 in 10 to almost 1 in 4 teenagers with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. Let me say that again. We've gone from 1 in 10 to 1 in 4 teenagers with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. When I was in medical school 30 years ago, there was not a single case of childhood diabetes that was not type 1 that I saw. Not one. Now it takes up most of the medical practices. And what's worse is the skinny kids also had a problem. 37% of the skinny kids had prediabetes by blood tests. So even though they weren't fat, they were sick. Even though the junk food wasn't making them fat, it was making them sick. So just because you're thin and you eat junk, you think you get away with it, not so. We call it the skinny fat syndrome. This woman died from drinking 2.5 gallons of Coke a day, 2 pounds of sugar, 900 milligrams of caffeine. She had liver failure. And Coke debated the autopsy, saying how there was no proof that actually the Coke was the cause of her disease. Well, we know it causes liver failure. So let's ask, what causes chronic disease, and what's the cure? And if we know these answers to these simple questions, we can do something about it. So what's the most effective strategy to prevent, treat, and reverse chronic disease? So I was just on Monday at the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland. The only problem with the Cleveland Clinic is it's in Cleveland. So I was like, why? But it's an amazing place, and the leaders there are very forward-thinking. Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. Okay. It's comfortable, yeah. Is that good? Okay. Now you can hear me better? Okay. So I went to the Cleveland Clinic and met with Toby Cosgrove, the head of the Cleveland Clinic, and they're very forward-thinking. They actually asked me to come and start an institute for functional medicine to find a better way to treat chronic disease, because they know the model is not working. For example, Avandia, the #1 drug to treat diabetes, has killed over 200,000 people since it was introduced in 1999 from heart attacks. So the drug to prevent diabetes causes heart attacks. Mark Twain said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so, right? We're so convinced of our way of thinking that we don't know what we don't know. So what about statins? Everybody thinks statins are great in the medical community. We should be putting statins in the water. Cleveland Clinic, the head of cardiology there, said, there's no proof that diet has anything to do with heart disease, and especially if you're taking a statin, there's no problem with worrying about what you eat as long as you take your statin. Well, the data are really interesting. They show that increased use of statins causes diabetes. 48% increase in diabetes risk in women. A recent study showed it also causes neurologic problems and cognitive problems. And a recent study showed that it actually decreases your metabolic function. It actually, if you exercise two groups of people who are overweight and you give one statins, the other group you don't, the group that took the statins, they don't get fit. And not only that, their metabolism slows down by 4.5%, while the people who are exercising, they increase by 13%. So even while exercising, their metabolism slowed down. So this isn't a great drug. In fact, you have to treat 50 people to prevent one heart attack and 890 people to prevent one death. So this is a lousy drug. If you came in with a bladder infection, I had to treat 50 people before one person got better, that would be a lousy drug. So let me just get this straight. The drug that's supposed to prevent diabetes or treat diabetes causes heart attacks, and the drug that causes heart attacks, the drug that is used to treat heart attacks causes diabetes. What do you call that? I call it Pharmageddon. This is not the way to go. I use medications when necessary, but most of the time they're not necessary if you get to the root cause. And the fundamental problem is we're treating 21st century diseases, lifestyle-related diseases, with drugs instead of things like diet and yoga, right? We need to rethink our whole approach. And we're failing. We're seeing increasing rates of obesity and cardiovascular disease, increasing rates of cancer, increasing rates of dementia, of allergic, autoimmune diseases, increasing rates of digestive problems, lower life expectancy. This is not a good trend. We spend more than twice as amount of any other country on healthcare, and we get way worse results and outcomes. The Institute of Medicine just published a report comparing us to our global brethren and countries around how we measure up in our healthcare metrics, and we suck. We do not do well, even though we're spending all this money. It's sort of like mopping up the floor while the sink's overflowing. We need to really focus on getting to the root cause. And ultimately, chronic disease is primarily a food-borne illness. We ate ourselves into it, we got to eat ourselves out of it. It's really that simple. This guy did. He ate himself out of anorexia. I beat anorexia. Funny. So we need to really rethink. You guys get it now? You have to rethink the whole problem of health and healthcare, medicine. And what I want to do from the rest of the talk is to explain to you how we can do that, how we need to rethink this problem, and how we can look at this. So reversing chronic disease is sort of the issue here. So does food cause disease? Well, most doctors would say, well, maybe. You can go gain weight, you can get, if you have too much salt, you get high blood pressure, and if you eat too much cholesterol, you get heart disease. There's some vague idea, but most of those ideas are wrong, by the way. But the idea that you could use food as a medicine, that you could intervene and use food as a therapy, that's not part of the conversation. There was one cardiologist from Harvard who said, if food was medicine, then I would have learned about it in medical school. That sounds a very circuitous logic. So then the question is, if food can cure disease, how does it work? And I'm going to explain to you how actually it does that. And then we're going to talk about, well, what should you eat? What are the foods that actually help us heal and create health? And it's really more than about treating disease. It's really about creating resilience. So I really focus on how do we create biological resilience, which is the most important question I have, because I don't really have to treat diseases individually. I don't have to create a program to treat a disease. I just have to create health. So, and every person, I ask really two simple questions. What is it that's impairing health or impeding health? What are the impediments to health? And what is it that's missing that's required for health? So what do you have that your body's not liking, you need to get rid of? And what do you need to get that your body doesn't have that is going to help it work better? So get rid of the bad stuff, put in the good stuff, and the body has this amazing capacity to heal and regenerate. So there is actually a new drug, though, that's been developed. It's quite amazing. It actually can beneficially turn on and improve the expression of tens of thousands of genes, balance dozens of hormones. It controls and optimizes tens of thousands of protein networks. It works faster, better, and it's cheaper than any drug ever developed. And it is available to almost everyone on the planet, and it has no side effects. It's powerful. In fact, that doesn't only affect your health, it affects everything. It affects the environment, it affects the way we grow our food, it affects climate change, the health of our rivers and waterways and oceans. It affects the health of our soils. It affects our economy. It affects everything about our lives. So every day, the thing you put on the end of your fork has more impact than anything you'll ever do. And collectively, we have more power than we even imagined to transform our country and our world and our health through the power of the fork. And the reason is that food is powerful medicine. It's not just calories, and it's not energy only. It's information. So it's like code. It's like genetic information code. So it translates into messages that speak to your DNA with every single bite, that turns on or off messages of health or disease. And literally, with every bite you have a chance to upgrade your biological software. That sounds like a good deal. You can literally transform your biological software. We'll take you through a story of that in a minute. We call that nutrigenomics, which is the power of food to regulate your genes. And if you have, French fries and a burger and a Coke, that's going to send one message to your genes. And if you have, a piece of fish and some vegetables and brown rice, that's going to have a different message to your genes. And what we found, what's even more striking, is that the food that you eat doesn't just communicate through the phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals and protein, fat, and carbohydrates, that there actually is the genetic material of plants that's now found in our bloodstream. Which means that when you eat broccoli, the genetic material of broccoli goes into your blood and starts communicating with your own DNA. And it tells your body what to do. And it sends messages of health instead of messages of disease. This is powerful. So we are just beginning to learn about how food influences health. And this is the new information revolution. The problems, Einstein said, that exist today in the world cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. We need to rethink things. We see radical changes in health in populations. For example, the Pima Indians, they lived to be healthy and fit and were very well, but in one generation, they became the fattest population in the world, second to the Samoans. Now, Samoans are the most obese. They have basically ramen noodles with Kool-Aid powder and MSG powder on top of it, and they are 90% diabetic. The Samoan Air wants to charge by the pound for their customers. But the Pima Indians in Mexico are thin and fit. They're eating their traditional diet. And we see this horrible condition where 80% of them have diabetes. Their life expectancy is 46. But the same thing happened to a group of Aborigines in Australia where they found they had the same problems: diabetes, heart disease, high cholesterol. And this researcher, this nutritionist said, look, these hunter-gatherers, these Aborigines are still a first-generation city dwellers, and they're just got introduced to the Western diet, but they still remember how to hunt and gather. So why don't we take them back out in the outback and let them go and see what happens? So she got 10 of them to agree. She drove them back out to the outback. They went for 7 weeks and ate wild food, kangaroo, alligator, nuts, berries, whatever they could find. 7 weeks later, they came back. They were off all their medications. They had no more high blood pressure, no more diabetes. Their cholesterols are all normal. They lost a tremendous amount of weight in 7 weeks. It doesn't take a long time. It doesn't take years to fix these problems. This happened to George. It took years for George to get like this. He's 300 pounds. He came to see me. He said, can you help me? I said, yes, but you have to do everything I say. And he had a lot of problems. He had like one of everything. He had heart failure, heart disease, angina. He had diabetes. He had reflux. He had sleep apnea. He had a fatty liver. He had sinus problems. He had sexual dysfunction, everything. You name it. He was, I actually take care of people with a whole list of problems. And that's why I call myself a holistic doctor, because I take care of people with a whole list of problems. And he had a whole list of problems. And often they see tons of specialists, get on tons of medications, 9 medications. And you know what? Nobody asked, well, how is everything connected? These aren't just all coincidences. So, I just want to address one, but let's just deal with your reflux today. Or let's just deal with your blood pressure today. Or we'll deal with your angina today. And come back next week, we'll deal with the other problems. You can't. The body is one system. Everything's connected. It's like an ecosystem. This is an ecosystem in Spain that actually was a estuary that got drained to be a cattle farm, failed, was bought back, and the people who bought it hired an ecologist to restore the ecosystem, and it became a fish farm. And it's like grass-fed fish. They don't actually feed the fish. They create a phytoplankton and algae system. The birds come eat the fish, and it's this incredible place. And they create 2,000 kilos of fish every year that's completely clean, full of omega-3s, no toxins or pesticides, and they don't have to barely do anything other than just create this healthy ecosystem. So the same way with humans, we need to learn how to create a healthy ecosystem. We need to not just treat the symptom, we need to treat the system, right? Sir Albert Howard, this is one of the books I read when I was in college, called The Soil and Health. He's the father of organic agriculture. And he said we must treat the whole problem of health in plant, animal, soil, and man as one great subject. These are all connected. You're only as healthy as the health of your soils. So treating the system is key, not just the symptom. And we do it through food. And we did this with George, and we got him on a whole foods diet, a low sugar diet. We got him eating more plant foods. We got him exercising a little, a few supplements to help control his blood sugar, and we got him a lot of support. And it was amazing what happened to him. Within a year, he lost 155 pounds, became completely transformed. Every single one of his diagnoses went away. All of his medications were gone. All of his numbers looked better than ever. This was at 63, so even if after a life lived with a whole series of insults, the body has amazing regenerative capacity. And he's now starting so healthy now, he's happy, 69, he's starting a bathhouse in New Mexico. So, like, go George. So, and all of his numbers went back to normal, everything went back to normal. So we have to realize that it's not just your genes. Maybe he had the diabetes gene or tendency towards this or that. But by changing the environment, we can transform your genes. And that's what we're learning how to do. And I really write about a lot of this in my cookbook, in my book, which is really how do we use the science of functional and systems medicine to actually create health and get to the root cause of disease. So now let's talk about a really basic idea, which is how do you deal with the issue of a simple problem we have, which is what's the care and feeding of a human? If you have a body, you need to know this, right? The most important things that we need to know for having a happy life, we never learn in school. How to take care of your body, how to manage your finances, and how to have healthy relationships. I can't help you with the last two, but I can help you with the first one. So again, it's really about what you put on your fork. And it's really about how this influences your genes and how it influences your gene expression. Let's just take this idea of calories. This is a huge cultural phenomenon. Everybody's focused on calories. And all the policymakers are focused on calories. It's all about energy balance. Just get rid of too many calories, so eat less and exercise more. Calories in, calories out. How's that working for you? Not so great. For most Americans, this is not a good strategy because not all calories are the same. If you were a 6th grade class and I said to you, class, are 1,000 calories of broccoli the same as 1,000 calories of soda? You'd all intuitively say no, but yet that's what the scientists tell us. And yes, it's true when you put them in a vacuum and you put them in a laboratory, yeah, according to the first law of thermodynamics, of course. It's all the same, right? Energy is conserved in a system. But when you put the food in your body, it's not a closed system, it's a dynamic system, and they're not reacting the same way. So for example, 240 calories of soda is a 20-ounce soda. By the way, it says 2 servings on there, but who actually shares, right? And most people, in this country are eating a lot of these sodas. So you have 240 calories. 240 calories of broccoli is like 7.5 cups of broccoli. And good luck if you can eat it, right? But drinking a 20-ounce soda is not hard. The 20-ounce soda has 15 teaspoons of sugar, no fiber, and a lot of other caffeine and a lot of other harmful chemicals. And sends really bad messages to your body to raise your blood sugar, raise your insulin, cause a fatty liver, make you hungry, and a whole series of cascade of problems. And cause cancer and heart disease and diabetes. Whereas the 240 calories of broccoli has 35 grams of fiber. It's a lot of fiber. It's full of phytochemicals, full of phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals. No sugar. And it balances your blood sugar and doesn't create any of those biological effects, even though it's the same exact calories. And that's really important to know. So it's really about the food quality that you're eating and not so much about the calories. So how does food influence human biology? Well, it does so through the energy in the food, right? Calories, which is true. The quality of the protein, fat, and carbohydrate. If you're eating wild meat versus a feedlot beef, very different effects on your biology. Very different amounts of fat, kinds of fat, even though it's exactly the same grams of protein. Same thing with carbohydrates. If you're eating carbohydrates from broccoli or carbohydrates from white flour, same gram per gram, very different biological effects. Same with fats. If you're eating good quality fat from omega-3 fats from fish or nuts or seeds compared to Crisco or trans fats, very different effects, same exact grams of fat. Also, micronutrients. What's the vitamin mineral content, which is typically low? And organic food typically has higher. Crazy and weird foods, as we'll show, have higher amounts of these nutrients. Fiber, important. Phytonutrients, which are these plant compounds we'll talk about that regulate your biochemistry in ways that are really important. And the plant genome, which is how plant genetics communicate with your genetics. And lastly, there's the anti-nutrients. Now, these are things we really shouldn't be eating. They're not really food, or as Michael Pollan calls them, they're food-like substances, right? If your grandmother didn't recognize it food, you probably shouldn't eat it. You know, would she know what a Go-Gurt is or a Lunchable? Probably not, right? So, I mean, it's gotten pretty bad out there. So food is really medicine. It works in a number of ways that I'll briefly talk about. One, it regulates your genes, which we've talked about, and epigenetics, which is what happens when your genes get turned on or off. It regulates enzymes in your body. So every single enzyme in your body is regulated by a nutrient. It's a cofactor. 1/3 of your entire DNA codes for enzymes. So it's a really big job. And you can't have well-functioning enzymes in your body that do all the chemical reactions without having the right level of nutrients in your body. And it's very difficult to get it all from food. Also, food regulates cell communication, hormones and neurotransmitters, and cell signaling. So if you eat sugar, it raises insulin, it affects your hormones, it causes a cascade that creates other hormonal dysfunction. So if you eat sugar, it actually causes higher cortisol and stress hormones, higher adrenaline levels. So what you eat has tremendous impacts on your biology. Immune modulation. If you eat a diet that's rich in inflammatory foods and fats like omega-6 fats from processed oils or trans fats, if you're eating processed food, white sugar, white flour, these are incredibly inflammatory. It also regulates it through allergens. A lot of people in this country now are gluten sensitive or dairy sensitive or other food sensitivities. These will trigger and regulate immune function. Detoxification, how your body handles toxins. We're exposed to 80,000 different new chemicals. Most of us are toxic waste dumps. I mean, if we were food, we really wouldn't be safe to eat. So we need to kind of rethink what we're doing and how to use food to help our bodies get rid of garbage. So broccoli, for example, has glucosinolates, which increase glutathione in your liver that helps your body detoxify. Garlic has sulfur, and many, many plant foods. And I write about in my book how you can use food. When I go to the grocery store, I think of it as my pharmacy, Pharmacy. Right? I think of it as, what drugs do I want to buy today? Oh, I can't get the cilantro, it's detoxifying. I'm going to get the daikon radish because that's good for detoxifying. Or I'm going to buy turmeric root because it's very anti-inflammatory and I make juice out of that. Or I'm going to buy some kale, which has glucosinolates that upregulates my glutathione. Or I'm going to buy almonds that have extra monounsaturated fats and magnesium. And so I have all this in my head. It's not easy if you don't know the data, but you basically have to go through the grocery store and find out what are the foods that are going to be helping you heal. My digestive function. I mean, if you eat a McDonald's breakfast, and I was reading about this the other day, the scientists in the University of Buffalo's done this work, and basically if you feed people a McDonald's breakfast, it creates a huge level of change in the bacteria and the gut, and it creates immediate inflammation in the body. Whereas if you have a whole foods breakfast, it doesn't do that, calorie for calorie. So you've got 10 times as many bacterial cells in your gut as your own cells. You've got 100 to 150 times as much bacterial DNA in your body as your own DNA. In fact, you're only 10% human, right? 10% human. Most of you is just a carrying vehicle for bugs. And those bugs and those genes have enormous impact on your health. They regulate all sorts of things. If you take mice and you sterilize their intestinal tract and you look at what happens to them, they get very sick because those microbes, the healthy microbes, are really involved in almost every function of your body. We have less genes than an earthworm. We have 20,000 genes or so. An earthworm has 90,000. But we borrow all the genetic hardware from the microbes that live in our gut to do all sorts of things. Make vitamins, regulate inflammation, and do all sorts of incredible activities that our bodies require. So keeping your gut healthy is critical. Mitochondria, again, these are bacterial derivatives. These actually look like little bacteria. They have to be well functioning for you to create energy. And a lot of us have an energy deficit. And it's because our mitochondria aren't functioning. And there's ways to use food to help that. And same thing with our structure. We're made of what you eat. I mean, you are what you eat. Literally, you're made of the stuff that you're eating. And you're also whatever you are eating ate, right? So you're not just what you eat, but you're what they ate. Like if you eat a plant that's been grown in depleted soil, you're going to get less nutrients or less phytonutrients. If you eat an animal that's been raised in a feedlot, you're going to be getting different hormones and compounds that might not be helpful, or fats or other things that are very harmful. So you really have to look at how do you build your tissues from real food. So what does the science say about what should we not eat? And then we'll talk about what to eat. And then I'll talk a little bit about the community piece, and then I think that'll be a day. So what we really should not be eating are what I call factory-made science projects. It should have a very short distance from the field to the fork, right? Ideally. So like the night before I came here, I went to the garden and cut all the arugula because it was going to go bad because I was going away. And I had a big arugula salad and had a very short distance. It was like, 100 feet from my kitchen, and never went in the fridge, and we just ate it. I didn't even wash it, That's ideal. Not everybody can do that, but the density of nutrients in those foods is so different than the food we eat. So we should not eat factory-made science projects. In fact, most of Americans have outsourced their cooking to the industrial food system. We've literally allowed the food system to invade our kitchens and to hijack our kitchens, hijack our taste buds, and hijack our brain chemistry in such a way that we get sick. I call these frankenfoods. These are highly processed foods, these anti-nutrients that are extremely harmful and are we'll talk about more in a minute, that should not be part of your diet. There's no reason to have additives, colors, chemicals, processed things as part of your diet. And we're feeding this to our kids. I mean, I was with Tim Ryan's wife and him the other night. She's a 4th grade teacher, and she told me the kids, when they go have these like slushy colored, like red slushy drinks, they come into her classroom and they're off the hook ADD and hyper. Well, there's been large studies showing that kids who are fed red drink that's like a natural juice, like pomegranate versus a red dye. The kids who have the dyed drink, even if it's the same sugar, everything, they go crazy. They have ADD and hyperactivity. So the anti-nutrients are the trans fats, they're high fructose corn syrup, artificial sweeteners, they're hormones, antibiotics, pesticides, they're food additives, MSG, colors, preservatives, they're hybridization. We've hybridized our diet and domesticated plants in such a way to create better qualities. For example, being able to grow in pesticide-resistant environments or drought-resistant environments. And yet these foods like the wheat we're eating is not the wheat that we used to eat. We'll talk about that in a minute. And that's led to increased allergens and other problems because of these weird proteins. And of course, there's a whole issue of GMO, which is genetically modified organisms. If your genes create proteins, and if these genes that are changed in our plants are creating different proteins, and if proteins are the information through which your body is regulated, then the question is, when you create all these bizarre proteins and stick them in our food, what do they do to us? Because they're getting in, and we want to really avoid this. MSG is a huge problem. Most of the time, you're not even aware you're eating it. It's called glutamate, gelatin, yeast extract, hydrolyzed vegetable protein. That sounds healthy, right? Hydrolyzed vegetable protein sounds healthy, right? But it's actually MSG, and you should learn all the hidden names, and you should stay away from anything with MSG because it not only triples your insulin level, but it causes binge eating, craving, and overeating. And it's in almost every processed food. Sugar, also a huge problem. We in this country consume enormous amounts of sugar. When we were hunter-gatherers, we consumed 20 to 20 teaspoons a year. Now the average American consumes 22 teaspoons a day of sugar in their diet. 140 pounds per person per year. I know I'm not having that much. That means some of you are having a lot more, right? So we have 15% of our calories in our American diet are from soda. Now, many of you don't eat this way, but this is a huge problem. And it's high fructose corn syrup, by the way, is the single biggest source of calories in our diet. And this has only been introduced into the food system in the last 30 or 40 years. And it's the direct time when our obesity crisis has gone up. Most of it is hidden sugar, and it's very addictive. And it's quite a problem. And many of you probably have experienced this, where you have cravings for sugar or carbs or starches or donuts. This is a real thing. In animal studies, they found it's 8 times more addictive than cocaine. They could give a rat a cocaine lever, and they could inject themselves with IV cocaine, or they could have a sugar-sweetened drink. and they'd go for the sugar-sweetened drink. And if they were already addicted to cocaine, they would then switch over. Now, a friend of mine just did a study. I wrote a blog about it last week on the Huffington Post about food addiction. And he did a study. It was fascinating. He took a dozen overweight men who had basically given them a drink. He gave them, or maybe it was the 16 guys, but he gave them a milkshake. Now, then a few days later, he gave them a different milkshake. But it tasted and looked exactly the same. You couldn't tell the difference. The first milkshake was just a low glycemic milkshake. So it was designed to actually have more fiber. You couldn't really tell, but it didn't raise the blood sugar quickly. The other milkshake was a trick milkshake. That milkshake was designed to raise the blood sugar a lot, what we call a high glycemic food. The group that had the milkshake, it was the same group, but when they had the milkshake that raised their blood sugar, they did functional MRI imaging in their brain. And that milkshake lit up, 4 hours later, lit up the addiction center in the brain. The same area that gets triggered by cocaine or heroin. And their blood sugars plummeted, they got hungrier, and they were craving more. So even though your body can't taste the difference, it knows what you're eating. And this is really a huge problem. The science of food addiction is an important topic, and it affects many of us, and we can't often manage it because you can't control this with willpower. So my next book is coming out next March. Actually, there's two books. One is in December, one's in March. But the one in March is called the Blood Sugar Solution 10-Day Detox Diet. It's essentially a sugar detox. So you want to avoid liquid death. I mean, you wouldn't probably put 22 teaspoons of sugar in your coffee, but you drink that if you have a soda. And it's just enormous amounts in this. Diet soda is not the answer because you have increases in risk of obesity and diabetes and overeating with diet soda. And Coke came out with a new thing called Diet Coke Plus with vitamins and minerals. Now, what I want to know is, do they really think we're that stupid? I mean, I don't know, but I guess so. Now let's talk about the other problem. So 140 pounds of sugar, 133 pounds of flour, of wheat flour, consumed every year by the average American. That's a lot of flour. And it's not hard to know that because if you just go anywhere, in an airport, in a convenience store, it's just all like donuts, bagels. It's if you go to a meeting, if you go anywhere, it's just what's available for us to eat. The problem is the wheat that we're eating today isn't the wheat that we ate 100 years ago. The genetics are different. We actually combine different strains to create a dwarf wheat. The guy who figured it out won the Nobel Prize. It's able to be grown in small quarters. It's drought resistant, pesticide resistant. It can help feed the world. The problem is it's got some very weird characteristics. One, it's got a super starch that raises your blood sugar more than sugar. In fact, you probably don't know this, but a slice of bread has a higher glycemic index than table sugar. Think about it. You could take 2 slices of whole wheat bread. Instead of that, you could put 2 tablespoons of table sugar on your sandwich fixings, and you'd be better off than having those 2 slices of whole wheat bread. The whole idea of whole grains that's being promoted by the food industry and by the government is completely misguided. Taking a few little specks of whole grain and putting it in a sugary cereal and calling it a health food is a problem. My philosophy is this: if you see any kind of health claim on a label, avoid it like the plague, because immediately you know it's bad for you. If it's promoting any kind of health benefit, forget it. Low fat, high fiber, low sugar, whatever. It's always a catch, okay? So this flour is in everything, and it's a huge problem. And whole grains, not whole grain flour can be okay, but whole grain flour or any kind of flour is a problem. So let's talk a little bit about practical solutions to regulating your blood sugar and regulating your metabolism, because this affects everybody, not just people who are overweight. I call this the 4 hormones of the apocalypse. There are 4 main hormones that are driving a lot of our eating behavior, and we can learn how to control those hormones, not by willpower, but by designing our life so that they get in balance, right? So let me ask you this. If I said, I want you to go back to your room, where there's a hot tub probably where most of you are saying, I want you to go in the hot tub and I want you to go underwater for 15 minutes and hold your breath. How would that work out? Probably not so good, right? I mean, you can't willfully control your breathing and hold your breath for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Even if I said I'm going to give you $10 million if you do that, no matter how hard you wanted to do it, you could not do that. The same mechanism that's driving our craving for oxygen and breathing is driving our craving for sugar. So you can't willfully control it. You have to redesign your life to actually make it so that your body doesn't have those symptoms. So first is insulin. Now insulin is, people think of insulin when they think of a type 1 diabetic and they have to inject themselves with insulin. But in most people, this is the opening the gates to help the sugar in your cells. But it also has a lot of other properties. It's a fat storage hormone. So when you have high levels of insulin, it makes you store fat and it makes you hungry. It makes you really hungry. And it also affects your brain. It turns off your brain's ability to recognize that you're satisfied with your meal. Have you ever, for example, had the experience of eating a really big meal and like an hour later being hungry? Like, how did that happen? You just are full. Like, why shouldn't you be hungry? But when you eat a big meal, you really cause a spike in your insulin, and then it screws up your appetite control signals. So for a short period at least, I recommend that everybody go through a test period of even 10 days of cutting out all flour and sugar and seeing what happens. Also, cutting out artificial sweeteners, because if you trigger your sweet taste receptors, you're going to be affecting your brain and how it regulates your appetite, and you're going to cause more cravings and more hunger. So artificial sweeteners are not the way to go. Even stevia can do this, although less so. And by the way, most of the stevia that's out there now is Franken-stevia. It's made by Coke and Cargill and Pepsi, called Truvia or Purevia, and it's what's in everything, and it's also packets of it, and it's not a health food, okay? They're very smart. They basically change the molecular structure of it to get it to be not bitter, but it's completely changed the whole component of it. Also fiber, very important, and there's different fibers you can eat, plant foods plus PGX, which is a super fiber that I write about. And then exercise, also very important. Ghrelin is another hormone. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone, and it's made in your stomach, and it's why you feel hungry. The best way to regulate that is to eat protein. Protein for breakfast. It could be nuts, seeds, beans. It could be a protein shake. For example, in the morning, I have a protein shake. I put hemp seeds, chia seeds. I put almond butter, coconut butter, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, and I put maybe some frozen wild blueberries or pomegranate seeds and a little hemp milk, and I blend it up. And that keeps me going literally for 6 hours. And it balances my blood sugar. I don't get spikes. I have good energy. Or it could be a couple of eggs. Eggs are not bad for you. Also, if you're really worried about overeating at meals, which happens, we get hungry. So it's good to have a handful of nuts in your purse you can have before you go to eat. And if you do that, you'll lower the ghrelin. You won't eat as much. And also, night eating is a real problem. So a lot of us eat at night, and late night eating, binging, that's a huge problem. And it's very difficult to break. But if you do these strategies together with the sugar and the protein and so forth, you can break that nighttime eating. And then sleep is important. If you actually don't sleep enough, you'll actually increase ghrelin and you'll be hungry. So if you cut your sleep by 2 hours a night, by the average American, used to sleep 9 hours. Now that we're down to like 6 and something or 7, it's just not enough sleep for most people. And she's yawning. See, she's like, I'm ready for bed. It's good. If you're tired, just go to sleep. I won't be insulted. There's a big room you can lie down. So the idea is if you don't sleep enough, you actually cause hunger. And I used to experience all the time when I worked in the emergency room. I would be working, and then late at night, I just wouldn't sleep all night. And the next day, I'd just be looking for sugar, looking for carbs. I used to drink, I used to have like half a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, big chocolate chip cookies. I used to crave tons of food because of this, and this is a problem. The next hormone is PYY. So this is the brake on the appetite. This is the I'm full hormone, right? So having a portion size that is either 2 or 3 to 1 vegetables to everything else will do this. So I think of meat as a condiment. So I like to have a big plate full of vegetables, and it's got unlimited refills. So often I'll make 2 or 3 vegetables at night. I'll make mushrooms, I'll make a salad, I'll make green beans or broccoli. I'll make a bunch of different vegetables, and I'll fill up on that. And that distends your stomach, and it distends your intestines, and it quickly puts the brake on. But the other thing you do is wait 20 minutes before you take seconds, because it takes 20 minutes for your brain to get the signal that I'm full. And you can try things like putting your fork down between bites, or increasing fiber, which sort of bulks up your diet. This is a very important strategy. And cortisol is also very important. This is a stress hormone. When you're stressed, your levels of hunger go up, your insulin goes up, you store fat, and they're very powerful tools. So yoga is my favorite tool for reducing cortisol for me. Exercise also is my other key strategy. Play, love, making love is great. All those things are really powerful tools to reset cortisol. And Sarah Gottfried gave a great talk this morning on hormones. Hope some of you saw it. You might be able to watch it online later. And it really talks about this phenomenon of cortisol and how to work with it. So the next strategy is, now that we've sort of figured out what not to eat and how to regulate these hormones a little bit, what should you be eating? It's really not that complicated, right? I mean, I'm embarrassed that now I make a living telling people what to eat when it's really so simple. I mean, you should eat real food made from real ingredients, cooked by a human, or a human nearby you. Okay? It's really pretty simple. Real food made from real ingredients, cooked by a human, or a human nearby you, right? If it's a guy in the kitchen in the restaurant, that's okay. But if it's like made in a factory somewhere and it's shipped and it's like a factory-made science project, you don't want to outsource your food. Eat from the right plant. Michael Pollan says if it was made in a plant, don't eat it. If it was grown on a plant, eat it, right? Avocados don't have a barcode, right? Almonds don't have a barcode. So you shouldn't be eating too many foods with barcodes. People say, well, how do you read labels? Well, you probably shouldn't eat food with labels. You know, if you have the label, don't eat it. Or as my grandmother said, buy fresh, eat fresh. Now, there's some exceptions to that. But, you know, if it has a label, you know, and it should have less than 5 ingredients, it should be all ingredients so you recognize that you can pronounce that aren't in Latin, you know, that are normal food, right? If it takes you more time to read the label than it does to eat the food, is probably not a good idea. My rule was, you know, need less than 5 ingredients, and I went to Haiti after the earthquake to volunteer, and we were working there, and for 3 days we really didn't have much to eat. And after 3 days, the military showed up, and I went over to them and I said, hey, you guys, you got any of those like meals ready to eat or whatever you guys eat? And we're really hungry. We've been in the operating room for 3 days, and we just like haven't really eaten Cliff bars and water, and we just like can't do that anymore. We're running out. So he said, yeah. So I kind of went in and I was like, what do you have? And like I was looking for some comfort food because it was pretty traumatic being in Haiti after the earthquake. And I found this dish called chicken and dumplings. I'm like, oh, this sounds great. I'm going to have this. And so I took it back and I went in the back of the OR. I opened it up and it's got this thermogenic kind of water activated heat thing where you have to heat it up. It's kind of cool. It's like a microwave. It's like without any electricity. And I said, oh, you know, I'll read the label while I'm waiting for it to heat up. So like I'm reading the label. It's like 500 ingredients on the label. And I'm looking for chicken on the label. It's like, where's the chicken? Where's the chicken? There was no chicken on the label. It was like a chicken-like substance, right? So you don't want to be eating chicken-like substances. I mean, even, you know, you think you're eating a French fry when you go to McDonald's. It's not a French fry. It's not mostly potato. It's got like 30 ingredients and only a couple of them are potato. A chicken McNugget, it's got like, again, like something like 30-some ingredients and very few of them are chicken. So we should be eating plant foods. Phytonutrients, very important. I just want to run through this. It's very fascinating data. You know, my new thing is that we should be eating weird and crazy vegetables. Strange vegetables, heirloom vegetables, things that you know, like purple potatoes. Like I had purple potatoes the other night. And you can find this stuff in supermarkets, but it's stuff that's going to be much more densely packed with these phytochemicals, which are plant compounds that actually act in your body like medicine. And for example, blue corn versus white corn has almost 100 times more antioxidants. Wild apples or cran apples versus, you know, regular apples, again, has, you know, thousands of times more phytonutrients and antioxidants. Blueberries, same thing. Wild blueberries versus domesticated ones. Iceberg lettuce has like 0.17, you know, antioxidants per 100 grams, whereas dandelion greens have 6.89, and spinach, which we think is a great superfood, only has 0.89. It's like almost, you know, 10 times in the dandelions what's in the spinach. So I like have dandelion greens. You know, they're a little bitter, but foods are bitter, they're good. Carrots. You think about carrots, you know, there's all kinds of different colored carrots, but the purple, yellow carrots are much better. Same thing with purple potatoes. You've got literally like 100 times more antioxidants in purple potatoes. So you want to eat foods that are more phytonutrient rich. And you can do that. What? Corn? Okay. You want a picture of the corn? Actually, you can look. I just stole this from the New York Times article. There's a woman who wrote a book about this, and there's a New York Times article about this, and they have this slide, pictures. The next thing you want to do is get an oil change. Most of us don't have the right oils in our body, and you're made up of fat. Every cell membrane that you have, 100 trillion cells, is made up of fat. Your brain is 60% fat. Every nerve covering is made up of fat. It's a critical component of your body, and if you don't have the right fats, you can become depressed and obese. So the good fats are wild fats, like omega-3, which mostly is from fish now. I used to live in Idaho. People would bring me elk, and so that had some omega-3 fats, because it's really what they're eating. Olive oil, there was a study recently they gave in heart disease. They gave people with heart disease olive oil or nuts compared to a regular breakfast, a regular meal, and they gave them a liter of olive oil a week, and those people had a liter of olive oil a week added to their diet, had 30% reduction in heart disease risk and heart attacks. It's pretty good. Coconut, it's a saturated fat, but it's got anti-inflammatory components, and it's different. Nuts and seeds, avocados, all these are really good fats that you want to include in your diet. Low fat is not the way to go. In fact, David Lidwig studied low fat. He found that people who had a low fat diet, their metabolism was slowed to the equivalent of 300 calories a day. So those who had a higher fat, lower sugar diet, it was actually like adding an extra 300 calories burning a day, which is like running an hour a day of exercise without doing anything. Next, protein is very key. Protein for breakfast especially, and every meal. This helps to improve your metabolism. I mean, it can be nuts, seeds, beans. It can be chicken, fish, pasture-raised animals. Some people are vegan, some people are vegetarian. There's certainly a lot of controversy there, but I think, I think everybody can agree that we need to downsize our meat. We need to use it as a condiment. We need to, have less of it, and we need to grow it in different ways that are sustainable. Supplements, people think, I eat a good diet, I don't need supplements. But, that only counts for under a few conditions. One, if you only eat wild food, if you only drink pure clean water, if you don't have any exposure to environmental chemicals, if you sleep 9 hours a night and you have no chronic stress. Does that describe anybody in this room? No. So most of us need something, and we're seeing increasing deficiencies, and I've been testing literally tens of thousands of patients. I've done tens and probably millions of tests in nutrient status, and I can tell you that nutrient deficiency is common. Magnesium, zinc, vitamin D, omega-3 fats, folate, B12, B6. These are really, really common because of the poor quality of our diet. And even with a good quality diet, it's very hard to have the optimal levels that we need. And it could be just a multivitamin, fish oil, and vitamin D. What about exercise? Very important. I'm a huge fan. I do it all the time. It's critically important for long-term health. In every condition that you can imagine, it helps to fix, prevent, or reverse. But here's the problem. You can't have whatever you want to eat and then exercise as a solution. You have to walk 4.5 miles a day to burn off one soda. You have to run 4 miles a day for a week to burn off one supersized meal. You can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. Okay? I have many patients that are overweight. It's like, look, I exercise all the time, I'm in the gym all the time, and I can't lose weight. Yeah, it's what you're eating. It's the food, stupid. It's what my friend President Clinton said, it's the food. Sleep, again, very important. Prioritize sleep. We'll go through that. Now let's talk about the community aspect, which I started this talk with. So I went to Haiti, and I got to know Paul Farmer. He's the guy, the other white guy in that picture. And this was right after the earthquake. We were in Haiti in the hospital. I got to know him very well, and after I went back to Haiti, and I sort of visited his clinic, where he had basically learned how to treat TB and AIDS when everybody else gave up on these poor people. This was the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, one of the poorest countries in the world. Everybody giving up on them, didn't want to treat them for TB and AIDS because it was too complicated, too difficult. The drug regimens were complicated. But he's like, no, I'm not giving up on them. And he realized that the problem wasn't they needed better drugs or surgery. The problem was they needed to deal with the structural and social, economic, and political conditions that were driving disease. So he created an environment of peer support where people helped each other get healthy. And I realized that, Chronic disease is the same thing. Chronic disease is a social disease. In fact, if you're overweight, you're more likely to be overweight if your friend's friend is overweight than if your parents are overweight. That the social threads that connect us are more important than the genetic threads. And I went to Haiti. It was pretty traumatic. This was after the aftermath of the earthquake. We were doing surgery in there. This guy walks in my office about 10 months later, and this is Rick Warren from a big church in Southern California. And he's like, I want to get healthy. I'm like, okay. He was a big, heavy guy. I said, okay. So I went through his medical visit. I said, afterwards, let's have dinner. And so we're having dinner. And I said, Rick, tell me about yourself, because I'm a Jewish doctor from New York. I don't know much about, evangelical Christians in Southern California. He said, we got 30,000 people in our church. I'm like, wow, 30,000, that's a lot. He said, yeah, we meet every week in 5,000 small groups to support each other in our lives. I'm like, wow, 5,000 small groups. I said, this isn't a mega church. This is thousands of mini churches. So the light bulb went off in my head, and I said, Rick, why don't we create a healthy living program and deliver it through the small groups in the church? And he's like, great idea, because last week I was baptizing the church, and after the 800th one, I was like, man, we're a fat church, and I'm fat, and we needed to do something about this. So we created this plan called the Daniel Plan, after Daniel from the Bible, who resisted the king's temptation of rich food and ate vegetables and water and was healthier for it. And I realized that nutrigenomics was important, but that also this idea of the social networks was important. I call this sociogenomics, which was the power of social networks to create health. And I went to this church, and I was giving talks in this big church with 10,000 people. There were 15,000 people that signed up the first week when we had our rally. It was pretty extraordinary. And Rick came to my office, and then, he lost 60 pounds. He looked great. And they wrote about it in Time magazine. In the first 10 months, they lost 250,000 pounds, the church together. 250,000 pounds they lost. And they did it by helping each other. And these were people who were not into tofu. I mean, these were people who really were eating Big Macs and, big gulps and big everything. And this is Chiquita, who was very overweight and diabetic, and she lost 155 pounds through the power of this approach. And we weren't treating anybody for a particular disease, but people got better from all sorts of conditions just simply by creating health. And we used this model of functional medicine to do this in functional nutrition. She gave me a t-shirt after called My Body is My Temple after one of the talks. This was Pastor Steve, who was born again. He decided to get religion about health, and he lost 35 pounds in the first 6 weeks. He's lost 4 inches from his waist. His triglycerides dropped 300 plus points. Cholesterol dropped 50 points. His good cholesterol went up. His blood sugar normalized. He got off most of his medication. And he came to see me a few weeks ago at my house, and he lost 90 pounds, had no more diabetes, was completely healthy and off his medications. This is the power of this approach. We had people with signs up, after one of the meetings, and it was amazing. People came and shared their stories, and not only did they have weight loss, because it wasn't a weight loss program, it was just a health program. They actually had all sorts of life transformations. They got reconnected with their spouses. Their lives got better in so many ways. And I realized that, we have to do this. In fact, we're writing a book, which is coming out in December, on this whole approach, on faith-based wellness. And it's really more about community wellness. I wanted to call it the Jewish Doctor's Guide to Christian Wellness, but they wouldn't go for that. So it's going to be called the Daniel Plan. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. But we're creating a curriculum to distribute through communities and churches all around the country. Well, not just a book, but it's all curriculum. And recently, I realized how we have to work together to solve this problem. I was working on a movie with Katie Couric and Lori David. It's called Fed Up. It's hopefully going to be the inconvenient truth for childhood obesity. And this family I went to visit in South Carolina was very obese. And the kid, Brady, was 260 pounds, had diabetes, pre-diabetes, almost diabetes. Mother was very sick. And I met with them, and I realized the most important thing I could do for them as a doctor was to teach them how to cook. They lived in South Carolina where they had 10 times as many fast food restaurants and convenience stores as grocery stores, where it was very hard to make the right decision, where they never were taught. There were a few generations of Americans here who didn't know how to cook. So I went and I said, let's just work. I'm on the board of the Environmental Working Group. And we had created a guide called Good Food on a Tight Budget. And we basically show people how it doesn't have to cost a lot to eat well. We're going to have a panel tomorrow morning. You should come. It's going to be about sustainable food at 10 o'clock in the morning. But we're going to talk more about that. But I brought some turkey chili, got some salad, some roasted sweet potatoes. And, I said, let's cook. And they're like, let's get the cutting board. They didn't have a cutting board. I'm like, let's get the knives. They didn't have knives. Everything they ate was from a box, a package, or a can. I said, don't you eat vegetables? Yeah, we eat canned green beans. What else? Boiled cabbage. That's it. They don't know how to make a vegetable. I said, have you ever sauteed asparagus or made a vegetable? No. Have you ever made salad? Well, we use iceberg lettuce, and they had this dressing that was mostly high fructose corn syrup. I said, let's make a salad, and let's make dressing out of olive oil and vinegar. How easy is that? So we made this amazing meal together, and they loved it. I mean, it was pretty amazing. Tina's the mother, and the first few weeks later, Brady texted me back. He said he lost 22 pounds. No one had taught them what to do. They wanted to know what to do. The husband was going to die from kidney failure, but they couldn't even get a transplant because he was so overweight. So this is a very powerful model. And I created a little online event called an Eat-In, where I invited everybody to just buy real food, eat real food, make it themselves at home with their friends and family, and celebrate food and life together. Simple idea, but it could change the world. So we're sort of all in this together. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to travel swiftly, travel alone. But if you want to travel far, travel together. So I hope we can all do this together and transform health and transform healthcare and transform our lives and our community together. So thank you very much.